the century. But other things have been happening in the world today, many other things. And in order to bring you up to date on what has been taking place while the rest of us have been watching the progress of the moonshot, here is ABC's Peter Jennings. Peter?
There was other news today. The Middle East conflict heated up with an air fight between Israeli and Egyptian planes over the Suez Canal. Egypt says it shot down 17 of the Israeli jets, but Israel admits to losing only 2, and in return reports shooting down 5 of the Egyptian planes. The Israeli report adds that the 2 pilots of their downed planes bailed out and landed safely in home territory. About the only fact on which both sides agree is that Israel started the fighting this time. And a spokesman in Tel Aviv says Israeli planes attacked Egyptian positions on the western side of the Suez Canal because of what he called Egypt's total disregard for the ceasefire line. A spokesman also said it was the first time the Israeli Air Force had attacked since the 1967 war. It is the Air Force on which Israel depends primarily for its defense. A report on that tonight from ABC's Russell Jones in Israel.
The Israeli Air Force, the spearhead of the Israeli attack, is getting an infusion of new blood. A class of air cadets is being inducted into active service. The Israeli armed forces are the nation's elite, and the Air Force is the cream of the cream. These young men are the survivors of training so rigorous that 80 to 90% of the cadets fail to pass. They are greeted by General Mohammed, the Minister of Defense, and the hero of both the 1956 and the 1967 wars. The highlight of the show are aerobatics by Fuga trainers, one of the few planes the Israelis permit anyone to get a close look at. The French-made Mirages, Israel's best warplanes, flashed by so fast they were difficult to see. The demonstration of firepower lasted 2 minutes and included napalm, something the Israelis only recently admit they have used. The troop-carrying helicopters are the same type the Israelis are reported to have used on raids deep into Egypt, but the security-conscious Israelis have never even admitted they used any kind of helicopter on the sorties. Much publicized but little seen except by the enemy, this is one of the few occasions the Israeli Air Force puts itself on display. Russell Jones, ABC News, on an Israeli air base.
There is still, of course, a war in Vietnam. Despite rocket and mortar attacks in the last 24 hours, the situation there is considered to be a continuation of what military spokesmen call a lull. And preparations are going ahead for the withdrawal of the balance of the 25,000 American troops that are to be out of Vietnam by the end of August. But turning control back to the South Vietnamese is not a simple matter, as ABC's Ted Koppel explains tonight in this report from a Special Forces camp in the Mekong Delta.
This Special Forces camp faces as much danger from within as from outside its perimeter. There are 6 companies of Vietnamese and Cambodians assigned to the camp with their families. There are also 12 U.S. Special Forces advisors. Several months ago, counterintelligence uncovered a plot to take the camp from inside. The U.S. Special Forces commander requested that a lie detector team be flown in. The next morning, 55 of the Vietnamese attached to the camp were missing and were never seen again. Counterintelligence has since reported another plan to take the camp from inside. This one is expected to coincide with a military assault from outside. Special Forces has pinpointed several suspects. High on the list are 2 girls who work in the team house kitchen, the father of one of the girls who is camp carpenter, and the uncle of the second girl who is camp mason. Far from being unusual, this kind of situation exists in most U.S. Special Forces camps. The American commander in this camp, Captain Brian McDonald, wants to gather more information before he makes his move. And so the Americans mount a special guard every night to keep an eye on their allies. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, in the Special Forces camp at Ba Swai.
It is a case of watchful waiting in Paris, too, where the Vietnam peace talks appear to have entered a new lull of their own. The North Vietnamese have turned down the latest South Vietnamese proposals on elections, but, of course, haven't come up with anything new on their part. Allied sources indicate nothing much can be expected to happen in Paris until after President Nixon's forthcoming Asian trip. But perhaps there may be developments in Washington after General Wheeler, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, reports to President Nixon on his just-completed tour of Vietnam. That report tonight from ABC's Sam Donaldson.
General Wheeler is expected to return from South Vietnam on Tuesday, bringing with him his first-hand impression of what meaning, if any, can be read into the current lull in the ground fighting. If it's read as a deliberate communist peace move, the president may be under great pressure to reciprocate, possibly by announcing a heavier second-step American troop withdrawal. While the White House mulls that over, the Senate will continue debate on the ABM, with no final vote anytime soon. Senator Mansfield thinks the vote may not come until September. But with the delicate Senate strength apparently shifted in favor of the president's safeguard ABM proposal. On taxes, Mansfield and the Democratic leadership remain firmly opposed to Senate consideration of the House-passed surtax extension bill until tax reform is coupled to it. The Republicans will spend the week trying to argue Mansfield out of this position by saying that each day's delay imperils the economy. But all this activity will have to go on without the city's chief resident. President Nixon attends the All-Star game at Kennedy Stadium Tuesday evening, then leaves immediately on his round-the-world trip. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, Washington.
Those Soviet warships that steamed down the U.S. coast and parked for a while off Cape Kennedy arrived today in Havana Harbor. Thousands of Cubans lined the shore, many of them waving Soviet flags. A hearing for Senator Edward Kennedy will be held in Edgartown, Massachusetts tomorrow. The senator may be charged after that hearing with leaving the scene of an accident. A car he was driving, as you'll remember, plunged off a bridge around midnight on Friday, killing a woman passenger. Senator Kennedy, reportedly in a state of shock, did not report the accident until some hours later. He said he had tried to rescue the woman but failed. The county clerk, tomorrow, must decide if the evidence warrants serving a summons on Senator Kennedy. In Washington, Democratic leader Mike Mansfield said it could have happened to anyone. Mr. Kennedy has my full confidence. Explorer Thor Heyerdahl is scheduled to arrive at the Caribbean island of Barbados tomorrow. He was forced to give up his planned voyage in a papyrus boat from Africa to Central America. Sharks prevented the crew from repairing the storm-damaged vessel, so the sailors went aboard an accompanying yacht. Heyerdahl, in a message today to U Thant at the United Nations, said that space-age man has too much in common to be separated by political blocks or racial barriers. In Major League Baseball today, the National League, St. Louis at Pittsburgh, and the Houston doubleheader at Cincinnati were canceled by rain. The Eastern Division leader Chicago beat Philadelphia 1-0 in the opening of a twin bill. And Montreal beat the New York Mets 3-2 in the first of their two games. Atlanta trumped San Diego 10-0. In the American League, it was Kansas City 8, Chicago 6 in their opener. Detroit beat Cleveland 3-2 in their first game. The New York Yankees beat Washington 3-2 in 11 innings. It was Boston 6 and Baltimore 5. California and Oakland are playing on the West Coast, as are Minneapolis and Seattle. That is the news of this planet this evening. Coming up, of course, more coverage of the flight and the moon exploits of Apollo 11. This is Peter Jennings in New York. Now back to Frank Reynolds.
Howard K. Smith is in our Washington studios, and he has some thoughts on this moment in our history. So let's go to Washington now and Howard Smith.
I'm told that there have been sporadic protests from television viewers at not being able to see their usual and favorite television programs this weekend, and there will probably be more complaints later on. I beg to suggest to complainants that they're seeing what television is really for. Too often we consider this medium just another method of watching movies and seeing what used to be called vaudeville without having the trouble of going to the theater. But its real value is to make people participants in ongoing experiences. Real life is vastly more exciting than synthetic life, and this is real-life drama with audience participation. When John Kennedy was assassinated, the nation was overripe for a burst of divisive bitterness. There's no doubt that by being made participants in that tragedy, Americans were purged of bitterness, and television was the cause of that. What the outcome of this participation of hundreds of millions of humans in an otherwise unbelievable human experience will be, we don't know. But as one newspaper commentator said today, we can be sure that things will not be the same again. There's one consolation for television viewers of this event. Reporters who go to political conventions have discovered that if they stayed home and watched television, they would find out more than by going to the convention. Well, you're watching on television and seeing things that one very important figure is not able to witness. He's Michael Collins, circling the moon, nearer than anybody else to the landing except the men who have landed. And he has been witnessing less than you. He doesn't have a TV receiver in his module, and you've got one in your home.